There's no crying in FBA. Good, we've got it set up correctly. Okay.
Yes, I'm here for the session.
Got it. I guess we've got 1 minute before we actually start.
Okay.
I can share the start. I'll share the screen real quick.
All right, help me figure out how to share the screen, Julie. We have to tell Zoom to share the screen. Here.
Okay, good.
Ours is share screen. Wow. Usually I can see it. Desktop one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you having trouble sharing?
Yeah, we're trying to get it. We're fixing it right now.
Okay, let me know if you need anything.
Okay. How did you? Can you guys see the screen at all? Nope. All right. Full screen.
When you click share screen, there should be 2 buttons down at the bottom, something about optimize video.
Oh, okay.
What did you get? Oh, look all that up. Look what you did under there. What in the world? Pick it all up. All those pieces. Yeah, Mom.
Alrighty. Can everybody hear, see the screen? Okay.
Yes.
We're going to go ahead and get started now that they got us in the breakout room. I'm Crystal Streeter. I'm the behaviorist for Adamswell Special Services, and my buddy over here is...
I'm Jolie Bright. I'm a school psychologist with GRIC, which is Greater Randolph Interlocal Cooperative.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about FBA planning. And we've entitled this, There's No Crying in FBA Planning. FBAs and BIPs don't have to be scary. And kind of the reason we went that way is because a lot of teachers, when they're told they have to do an FBA, it is scary. It's a lot of steps and they don't always understand the lingo, and it can be very frustrating. So we're going to very quickly go through the components of a functional behavior assessment and give you kind of a crash course in what some of that information means and some of the terminology and things that you may run into as part of this process. So real quick for trading goals, we're going to give you adequate information to initiate an FBA and develop a BIP. understand when an FBA and a BIP is appropriate, why it's so important to complete them accurately and correctly, give you a basic understanding of terms and concepts, understanding the difference between anecdotal notes and data, and the basics of some different ways to collect behavioral data, and then how to use different behavior strategies and resources. This is for teachers. This is the where to find help. And then some basics on progress monitoring the behavior intervention plans. So review the basics. This particular little meme here says the BCBA said that the FA of the SIB suggests that the NCR with FT60 would be better than DRA plus extinction for FCT. Let's put it in the BIP and SIP or the IEP. Unless you're a behavior person, the vast majority of people I've shown this to, because they don't know what that means. So in behavior language, it says the behavior consultant, the BCBA, says that the function assessment of SIB is self-injurious behavior, suggests that a non-contingent reinforcer with a fixed time interval of 60 seconds would be better than differential reinforcement plus extinction and functional communication. Let's put it in the behavior support plan and the IEP. And people wonder why people get frustrated and nervous when somebody says they have to do a BIP. We speak a completely different language than the vast majority of people are familiar with. Even our school psychologists, I'll have these conversations that are like, in English, please, can I buy a vowel? So that's part of the reason why I thought we would go over this. Real quick, what is behavior? It's the way in which an animal or person acts to respond to a particular situation or stimulus. So in English, anything a person says or does, behavior involves movement that has impact on the environment. It's influenced by your environmental events, what's happening around you. It can be observed, described, and recorded. It needs to pass the dead man test. Dead man test is if your teddy bear can't do it, it doesn't pass the dead man test. It has to be able, it's an active thing. If a dead man or a teddy bear can do it, it's not behavior. So what is a functional behavior assessment? A functional behavior assessment, most times in schools you hear it referred to as an FBA. It's a systematic means of identifying the variables that control behavior. Behavior is, it gets people something. That's the whole point of behavior. A baby cries, so it gets fed. I mean, the very first thing you do when you're born. Behavior is something that we do. Both the antecedents, what happens before, and the consequence of what happens after. During this process, we examine those things to understand why a behavior occurs in a particular context. What is the person getting out of this behavior so that they continue the behavior? If you weren't getting something, the behavior would stop. So that's the process of figuring out those pieces and components so we can manipulate things to either increase or decrease a behavior we want to see. Why do we have to do this? I get this question all the time in case conferences. This is why. It's mandated by IDEA and Indiana's Article 7. It's actually the law. Above and beyond that, it leads to effective interventions. This is a very good way to truly get to the root of a problem and solve the problem. If you don't do a functional behavior assessment, we're going to talk about this a little bit here in a minute, you may be reinforcing a behavior you don't want because you didn't really figure out why the person's doing the behavior. It's a best practice for service delivery. It is going to make us the most effective we can be. And it also offers legal protection, not only to the students that you're addressing, but also school districts. It protects you as well. When do we have to conduct an FBA? There are certain guidelines of when you have to. When a suspension or alternate placement exceeds 10 days or results in a change of placement. If you got a behavior that's putting a kid out of school more than 10 days, you need an FBA because you need to figure out what's going on with the kid. When misconduct results in an alternative placement for 45 days or involves drugs or weapons. And then if a due process officer places a student in an alternative setting for behavior that's dangerous to self or others, you do it as a safety protection step in that case. There are some other times that they're required. These eligibility areas, if you've got a student who's ASD and on the spectrum, and that is their exceptionality in special education, they should probably have an FBA. Those students almost always manifest behaviors that are maladaptive. That's what we're identifying by the special education evaluation. They are not doing what they need to do to be successful in school. Other health impairment, OHI kids, kids with some behavioral disorders, PTSD, what else, Julie?
Oh,
for OHI that we would require a behavior plan. Basically,
ADHD is
yeah,
often.
ADHD. Yep.
Yeah, any type of behaviors that anxiety sometimes falls under.
Yes, and we'll
ADHD.
do an FBA to determine how do we reduce the anxiety and what are the anxiety triggers. Emotional disability, EBD, emotional behavioral disorders. Those guys will also require a functional behavior assessment. Other factors. If a student's at risk for suspension, expulsion, or placement change because of behaviors that they're exhibiting in the classroom, it's a good idea to do an FBA, get ahead of it, figure out what's going on so that they can be successful. If a students are receiving full-time services in a self-contained classroom, they probably need an FBA. Students' behavior, so this is your basic guideline. If a student's behavior is impeding his or her ability to function in a classroom, it's never a bad idea to do an FBA. You're not going to hurt anything by doing one. So real life implications, people who follow kind of the legal precedents, several years ago, the Andrew F. versus Douglas County Schools case. So in that case, we had Andrew F. and his family go against the Douglas County Schools, which were in Colorado. And with that case, he was in public school. He had major behaviors. He was a child on the spectrum. It got to the point where he is not able to function in the school. School went round and round with the parents. Parents had requested some additional supports. The school said no, they were not going to provide those supports. The student had made what was considered de minimis progress, meaning that they had the absolute minimal progress that they could make. And so the school said, no, the student's making progress, so we don't have to change anything. When I'm saying de minimis progress, it was like they gained one word. It was very limited progress, but because by the definition of law, it met progress, the school said they were not going to provide additional accommodations and supports. So the parent withdrew the child, enrolled them in a specialized school for individuals with autism, and put that student in the school for a year, I believe it was.
Yep.
And while he was in that school, the specialized school did a full functional behavior assessment, got a strong behavior plan in place, and he started making major gains to the point where the parents felt like it was time to send him back to public school. So they took the new FBA and everything else, they went to the public school and they said, we're going to re-enroll our child. We would like you to do a functional behavior assessment in your setting so that he can continue to be successful. And the school said no. So the parent said, well, you're not providing our child a free and appropriate education, FAPE, which is required by IDEA. We are going to put our child back in the specialized school and you're going to pay for it because you are not meeting the law and providing our child a free and appropriate education. And this went all the way to the US Supreme Court. This was a huge case. And in the end, the parents won. And the reason that the parents won, essentially when they broke down the case, was the school did not meet FAPE because they did not provide a functional behavior assessment to a child who was unable to function within their current setting due to extreme behaviors. So they did not go through the process of identifying the function of the behavior, identifying what we could do to help them, and putting a solid evidence-based plan in place to then reduce behaviors. So therefore they weren't providing FAPE. And the school ended up having to pay for this child to go to private school. And the reason this is important is because now this is common case law. And so you are now starting to see parents who are aware of this case and going back to schools and saying, look, I think my child needs specialized instruction that you can't provide in a public school, pay for it over here. And so we really do have to look at, things like FBAs and evaluations and making sure that we're following the law, because it could come back and have a monetary effect on our school districts. So conducting an FBA, they take three forms. One is an indirect functional behavior assessment. An indirect functional behavior assessment is, we're going to talk about more, but it's really more, you're not working directly with the kids, you're working with the school and the teachers. Direct descriptive functional behavior assessment and functional behavior experimental analysis. Those are all FBAs, they're just different types. So an indirect functional behavior assessment, this is what we most commonly see. Review of records, behavior rating scales, social skills ratings, adaptive behavior assessments, informal interviews, semi-structured interviews. It's generally the first step in conducting an evaluation of behaviors. And classroom teachers, you guys are in the front line of this. Most of the things I mentioned over here, you guys are going to be the ones filling this stuff out and giving us this information. The purpose is going to be identifying and describing behavior, generating a hypothesized functional relationship between the antecedent, which is what happens directly before the behavior itself, which is the action that we are talking about, and the consequence being not punishment, but our response to the behavior, whatever we do or the people around them do, or how the environment reacts to the behavior. Direct descriptive functional behavior assessment, it's going to involve collecting observational data. And again, you see these types as well in schools. Observational data on the student. Somebody will come in and actually have an ABC form and sit and observe for 30 minutes and say, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's going to observe and record specific target behaviors. We're going to say, okay, teacher says the problem is the behavior is that the student shouts out all the time. And then I will be, I'll go in and say, okay, I'm going to observe for 30 minutes and I'm going to count how many times the child shouted out within your environment. And I might do it in several environments to compare. It's also going to involve a systematic observation, which is where I observe the target student and compare them with somebody else to see, are they really that different than everyone else? Scatter plot data, that's another way to collect data. We'll talk about in a minute. ABC data collection methods. And it usually involves individuals with a little bit more specialized training. Somebody like me, who's the behavior specialist, will work with the classroom teacher to help gather all the right information. Maybe a school psychologist, your special education teachers may do this. You're not going to be doing this alone as a teacher. Functional behavior analysis. This is probably the highest level that we would do within a school setting. I don't do these a lot in school settings because they basically take over a classroom. So what we would do is we would determine the hypothesis of the behavior, and then we're going to set up essentially an experiment. And so I'm not really going to talk a lot about this because school teachers wouldn't be doing this. You might work with the behaviorists, and even school psychologists don't typically do this. This is done more by behavior people, but I would meet with you as a teacher and say, okay, using our shouting out example, for the first 30 minutes, every time that child shouts up, I want you to walk over and give the child attention. And I'm taking data to see if the behavior gets worse or better. And then the next 30 minutes, I might say, okay, from now on, every time the child shouts out, I want you to ignore the behavior. And I'll tell you what to do. And I'm basically setting up small experiments to see which variables increase or decrease the behavior. So like I said, they're rarely conducted in school settings. I've done it probably 10, 12 times in the entire time I've been in a school setting. Typically when it happens in a school setting, it's like in the ED classroom and there's very limited kids and we've got a kid who nothing else has worked. This is more frequently seen in a clinical setting. So if you're working with a student who works with an ABA clinic, there's a good chance that this style of functional behavior assessment was conducted at the ABA clinic. So there are 5 essential components of an FBA. Identify and define the target behavior for change. If we don't know what we're looking at, we can't go any further. You're going to collect the data about that behavior from multiple sources. You're going to develop a hypothesis of what you think is the function of the behavior. What is the behavior getting for the individual? Then you're going to identify alternative behaviors to replace it. So if a child is shouting out to gain adult attention, then you're going to develop what is the behavior I want them to do instead to get my attention. And then you're going to figure out what interventions and what skills do I need to teach in order to get the child to do that alternative behavior that I'm wanting them to do. So identifying the target behavior. What is the behavior that's causing the learning of the discipline problem? When you're writing a behavior plan, we don't do any more than 3 target behaviors at a time. There are kids who have a lot more target behaviors that teachers are concerned about. You think, what is my biggest fish? What are the 3 biggest things we need to reduce? The team's going to define that in concrete terms. I should be able to take a stranger off the street, walk into the room, give them this it's called the operational definition, give them the operational definition, and they should be able to go, that's my kid, based on the description of the behavior that you give. I have a resource page we'll talk about here in a second, and I have put some definitions on there to kind of give you as a guide, but you don't have to follow an official definition. It's you and the team sitting down and saying, what does Johnny look like? What does he do and how does he do it when he's acting out in this way? And defining it so somebody could walk in a room and ID it. How frequently does the behavior occur? How long does it last? And how intense is the behavior? That's your baseline. You have to know where you started so you can know if your interventions are working. Step 2, you're going to collect data from multiple sources. ABC data, systematic observation with and without a control, scatterplot data collection, behavior triangulation, screeners, and checklists. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Behavior data is key in this whole process. We cannot operate without data. And data is not anecdotal notes, which we'll talk about too. So data becomes really, really important in this process, and being able to collect it well is really going to make or break your behavior plan or make or break your effectiveness of your interventions. So this is an example of an ABC form, how this form would be filled out, and you can find these online. Your schools may have them. Talk to your school psychologist. A lot of them have different ones that you can already use. You put the date, time it occurred, what was going on when the behavior occurred. You know, this was reading time, this was math time, we were transitioning, all that. Antecedent, what happened right before that may have triggered the behavior? I asked Johnny to get out his math book. What did the behavior look like? Johnny yelled and threw his math book on the floor. Consequence, what happened after the behavior, or what was the result of the behavior? I asked Johnny to pick up his math book. I asked Johnny to open to page 47. I ignored Johnny's behavior. I called for somebody from the office. What happened? All the kids looked at Johnny and laughed. What happened after the behavior? Pretty much immediately after the behavior. When we do these forms, we're looking for patterns. This is a systematic observation form. So this would be a target and a peer. There's a code down here that's going to tell like what the observation intervals. Observation intervals are typically 15 seconds, 30 seconds, or 1 minute. What was the student doing? And then you're comparing to a peer. And I want to know what percentage the student was on task versus what percentage they were off task. And when they were off task, what were they doing? And you use that to find, I mean, that's a way to normalize. Is that student's behavior actually normal? Or are they atypical compared to peers? This is scatter plot data. This would be, here's the day in short intervals, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And basically with this type of form, see where it says behavior occurred here, behavior did not occur, no data. Basically, you're only marking the time slot that a behavior is occurring on the date that it's occurring. And the cool thing about these forms is if they're done correctly, I can literally graph behavior right across this form. This is one example. There's probably 100 examples of this style. Behavior triangulation is another way to collect data that is different. Behavior triangulation is when we take 3 different types of data, we review it, and we say, is this behavior consistent among settings? So we might use a scatter plot that shows the behavior happens in math. The teacher interview indicates that, and during math, we feel like the student is low functioning. They maybe are doing some attention seeking behavior. Teacher interview also agrees with that. And then somebody does a systematic observation, which also agrees. So you have 3 sources that align. That's a pretty good way to figure out a hypothesis that, yeah, this behavior is probably happening like we think it is, because you have 3 separate settings that all say the same thing. It's another way to collect data. It's not as accurate as some of the other ways, but it is a valuable way, especially on a lower level behavior, or like an RTI team may use this way to collect behaviors. Then we get into things like screeners, interviews, and checklists. These are formalized screeners. This one is called the Problem Behavior Questionnaire. It was designed by Terrence Sky. It's been around since the early 90s. It's a good tool. This is a baseline tool for classroom teachers to find out the function of behavior. You fill this out based upon thinking about the target behavior. And when you're done, you score it, and I will actually give you a pretty good indication of which area of function the behavior falls in. This is also very similar. It's questions about behavioral function. I feel like this one's a little bit stronger of an evaluation because it also looks at sensory components, whereas this one does not look at sensory components as much. This is another checklist that's out there. What are my school triggers? You do this with the student, and they talk to you about what things teachers are doing that really set them off. This is it sensory questionnaire that it models very similar to the problem behavior questionnaire that I showed you on there at school. But if you're looking at what type of sensory system, is this a sensory driven behavior? Is it not? Is the student needing to be overstimulated or understimulated? These will help you to answer those questions. Teacher interviews, you give a teacher, you can do this with the teacher or just provide it to the teacher. They give you information about the classroom. Student interview, especially your older students, they can tell you a lot about their own behavior and what's going on in their head. So here's an example of a student interview form. Same thing for parents. There's a lot of things happening at home, especially when it comes to behavior, that we don't always know about. And so using a parent interview form and getting a hold of that parent and talking them through this, you will get a lot of information about the child by using a parent interview form. Different motivation surveys, what motivates them? You can use that information to provide reinforcers for the individual. There's tons of those different ones. These are just a few examples. These ones, if you're using, they're good tools, but you're probably, as a classroom teacher, not going to use them on your own. You'd be using them on in alignment with either your school psychologist or your behavior specialist. This is the Beck Depression Inventory. It may give me a baseline to see, is the child depressed? Depression can affect behavior. Anxiety affects behavior. Same here. Beck and the Spence is for younger kids. The Beck Depression Inventory you can use for younger kids. The Spence you can't use until I think it's the age of 9. So if you got younger kid, or the Beck age of 9. So if you got younger students, the Spence scale. These two do the same thing based on age. This one focuses on depression. These are free. So if a school district is looking for something like this, you can find these for free. They are good screener-based tools. So step 3, you got to develop a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement summary. It predicts the general conditions under which the target behavior is going to most likely occur. When this happens, it's very likely that I'm going to see this, and this is why. And you're gonna identify it in a concrete sample of events or environments. So when the child is in reading class, when asked to read independently, the child becomes anxious and frustrated and will attempt to escape the task by verbally refusing or becoming verbally disruptive in the classroom. So, crash course in behavior functions. This is a great acronym to remember. There are 4 basic functions of behavior. Sensory, what it does for them, it provides sensory experiences. It feels good. A lot of times you see sensory-based functions on a lot of kids on your spectrum. Your spectrum kids a lot of times will have sensory issues. Your OHI kids, some of your ADHD kids will have a sensory function to their behaviors. When it happens, keep this in mind, anytime, even when alone, especially if they're anxious. If you have a kid that it doesn't matter what you do or what's happening around them, and they're going to continue to do that behavior, check out sensory, because odds are it's a sensory-based behavior. Escape removes an undesired activity or interaction when a task too hard, too easy, boring, scary. I'm anxious, I'm frustrated, I can't deal with this anymore. I know if I do this, I get to stop. That's an escape behavior. Attention. Attention is it gets access to people or interactions that they want. If they want social interaction, if they need emotional support, people say a student, a lot of times I'll hear teachers say the student, the function is control. They want to control the situation. That's an attention-based behavior. They are controlling the situation and getting your attention to do it. Getting the peers' attention to do it. So if you're thinking, if your first thought is they just want to control everything, this isn't it, then you need to start thinking attention, because this is an attention behavior. And tangible provides a preferred activity or an item. They want something. It doesn't have to be a concrete thing. It could be, most of the time it's tangibles, but sometimes it's they get to go to a specific environment. You'll have to investigate what exactly that tangible thing is. But yeah, they want something. It can be a lot more complicated than that. So if you run into a case that is, remember that it's true. I made it sound really simple. It's not. Kids are very complicated, especially kids of trauma. And then some of your ADHD kids, it's not always that simple. So just keep that in mind. It's okay. It's not that simple. Your hypothesis example. So first instance, this is Lucy reports, a teacher reports that Lucy curses during instruction. We do an FBA, and the function of the behavior is to gain attention. She wants verbal approval of her classmates. She wants to avoid instruction because it's hard. She's looking for external stimuli, or to both gain attention and avoid a low interest subject. When we figure out which one of those it really is really when we can figure out ways to stop it. So before we would say, we're going to set a plan in motion, we are going to look at her, do those assessments, and figure out which one of these things, verbal approval of classmates, avoid instruction, seek excitement, or gain attention, or both, which is called a multifunction behavior, is really going on. Once we have the hypothesis, then we're going to decide to make accommodations to the environment to make sure she's getting what she needs in a way that's appropriate versus inappropriate. If when we do our hypothesis and we put these interventions in place and we track data, the change in her environment reduces the behavior, we were correct. If the behavior remains unchanged or gets worse, our hypothesis was not right. So we need to go back and look at our hypothesis again and change our variables and see what else we can do, because we didn't hit the nail on the head the first time. So why does having a good hypothesis matter? Don't be Luke Skywalker is what I say. I give him work and he starts crying. So I give him a sensory break. Plot twist. The function of the behavior was escape. Every time we let him get away with that work and go take a sensory break, and I'm not saying don't use sensory breaks, but if you didn't identify that the function of the behavior was escape, every time you allow that child to escape the work, you are reinforcing the behavior and you're going to increase the frequency that you see that behavior. So we have to be really careful, and that's why we have to look at it, because you can actually be making a behavior worse because we didn't determine why a child was engaging in the behavior. Step 4, identify the alternate behaviors to reduce or replace appropriate ones. You're looking for a behavior that's going to serve the same function as the target behavior. You want it to be easier to do and more efficient than them engaging in the behavior you don't want to see. It needs to be provide less physical effort typically and get a quicker, more reliable response than what they're doing. And it has to be socially acceptable. So yeah, there are some target behaviors where we could say that's, yeah, we could get up and go get in somebody's face to get the attention that we want, but that's not socially acceptable. So using my shouting out example, what we want them to do is to raise their hand and ask for help. So what you would do is every time they raise their hand, you would quickly respond to that, even if it's, I see you, I'll be there in a second, but respond to it. And then you're going to pair that with ignoring the other behavior as much as you can. And what they're going to find is they get their attention that they're seeking quicker when they do it how you want it to do it than they do if they don't. And raising their hand is a socially acceptable way to do this. So here's some other examples of alternative replacement behavior examples. Attention, replacement behavior, chase after them, yell at them, spend time with them. Raise their hand to get the teacher attention, request to play a game with a preferred adult peer. Escape, request a break, request help with a challenging task. Sensory, request a movement break. Teaching student requests items that they want to use using words or symbols. This is functional communication. But here's some examples of classroom appropriate replacement behaviors. So step 5, you're going to develop an intervention considering the variables that we talked about. Manipulate your antecedents or the consequence or the response to the behavior. Teach more acceptable ways. When you're going to do that, you got to be clear. Who's going to do it? When is it going to happen? How often are we going to teach them? And what setting is the teaching going to occur in? Implement changes in curriculum and instructional strategies. Maybe you have to do things a little bit differently. Maybe they have maybe they can type their answers on a computer versus writing them. Maybe you have a student, especially if you've got a special education student who's possibly lower functioning or needs specialized instruction through an IEP to address this to help reduce their behavior. Sometimes you have to modify the physical environment. Maybe you need to move their desk. Maybe you need to hang visual supports. Maybe you need to give them a different style chair. Things like that you're going to look at. So we don't really have time to go through this, but you can read this on your own. This walks you through the natural consequence of a functional behavior assessment and how we would set things up. So we're going to put it all together and we're going to create a positive behavior intervention plan. So in order to have a positive behavior intervention plan, you must have identifying information, description of the behavior, what are the replacement behaviors, what are the preventative, proactive strategies that you're going to put in place to help prevent the behavior from happening, what are teaching strategies that you may implement to address the child's needs. Consequence strategies are not punishment. What are you going to do if the behavior occurs? How are you going to respond to it? How are we going to collect the data? And how long is the plan going to run? This is an example of a plan that is created by Catherine Phelps. She's a behavior specialist, goes around the country. You can find lots of examples of shells for setting up behavior intervention plans if your school doesn't have one, or if you're not, if you need one as a teacher and need access to one. There's tons of them out there. Shoot me an email. I can send you a few if you need. So identifying information. Who's the student? Who's on the team? When was it designed? Because we need to know how long this has been going. And when and where is this plan going to be implemented? Basics. Operational definitions. What does it look like? Describe it. What does the student do? Here's an example of some different defined operational definitions. Again, that's another thing that you can find. We have some resources for that we can send you if you'd like as well. Implement replacement behaviors. What do you want the student to do instead? Think about it. What's going to get them the same thing? What's going to give them the same sensation if it's a sensory-based behavior? What can they do to allow them access to what they want in an appropriate way? They want your attention. The way they're going to get it is they're going to raise their hands. That's the appropriate way. And so that's the skill you're teaching, the appropriate way to access help. Prevention strategies. What can I do to stop the behavior from occurring in the first place? So you got to look at triggers. If they're triggered by loud noises, removing distractions, rearranging the furniture, scheduling or providing access to items that they need. You know, you're going to look at, what is my classroom environment? How is it affecting the behavior? Is the task too difficult? You know, we say the kid can do it. Can they really? Go back to their academic scores, look at their NWA, look at their iReady, whatever screening tools you're using in your building to drive instruction. Can they really do what you're asking them to do? Maybe they need a different seat, preferential seating. Maybe they need less noise. Maybe they need some different people around them, whether that be adults or students. Maybe they need to get access or reduce access to things. Maybe they're a kid who needs to have a fidget at their desk. Maybe they're a kid who needs everything taken out of their desk and they're just provided what they need for a particular task because there's just too much distraction around them. Look at those things that happen before the strategy or before the behavior occurs and what can we manipulate there. Teaching strategies. Behavior intervention plans are also sometimes referred to as PBIPs, positive behavior intervention plans. You have to teach the child what you need them to do. You have to teach a skill deficit. You have to, so it's not just we throw these things out there and see if they work. We have to do things to fill in holes and gaps in skills that they don't have. So what skills are they missing that's preventing them from being successful? What do you need to teach them so they can participate in the plan? I gave them this tool, this strategy, you know, STAR, having them to stop and learn to breathe or help to stop and assess a situation. You can't just put the acronym STAR on their desk and expect them to know how to use it. We have to teach the interventions and the strategies that we're using with these kids so that they know how to implement them across settings. Consequence strategies. It's natural, contrived, and it's what happens following the behavior, either positive or negative. So when we provide positive consequences, reinforcers, things that we want them to have, you can increase the frequency of a behavior you want to see. They did what we wanted to do, we're going to reward them. If you do the opposite, negative, you know, what's going to happen when you need to pre-plan this and put it in the plan so that everybody understands. What will happen if they do what they want? If they do what you want them to do, we're going to praise them. We're going to contact home. We're going to give them a star. They're going to earn time with a preferred adult. We use PBIS bucks. They're going to get a PBIS buck. What are you going to do? And you're going to define it. What will happen when they don't engage in appropriate behavior? They're going to miss out on an opportunity. They're not going to get their token. I don't usually tell schools right off the bat to use negative things where we're going to take something from them. Natural consequences are really good in the school setting. You didn't get your work done? Okay. You're only going to get 5 minutes of recess or 10 minutes of recess because we're going to split this. You're going to get this done. You didn't get your work done? Well, you can't watch the movie until your work done. If you can take a consequence and pair it to a natural response to something, you're going to be better off than just doing like a random, hey, you didn't get your work. Okay, great. You're going to walk the line at recess. Like those aren't relatable to each other. And so the better you can make a natural consequence, the better they're going to understand these particular situations. Data collection procedures. Target behaviors to be increased, decreased must be written in terms that allow for observable and measurable behaviors. You're going to make changes based on the data that you record. Whether the behavior is getting better or worse, it's based on the data. We have to be able to observe this in measurable terms. If you need help learning to write a measurable behavior goal, go hit up your special education department because they write them for IEPs every day. And I mean, that's how they communicate information. So if you need help with that, your special ed teachers can help you with that. What is data? I use the term data a lot throughout this presentation. It's a very important concept for behavior planning. Data is information in a format that can be graphed or compared looking for change. It's clearly defined, observable, and measurable. I tell teachers all the time, more words or more numbers, less words. I feel terrible when I sit down with a teacher and they have been working so hard and they come in with a spiral notebook full of anecdotal notes, telling me all these different things that happened. That's not data. Data is numbers. Anecdotal notes are really good for background information. You can use anecdotal notes to help, create your operational definition because you go back and say it looked like this each time, but anecdotal notes are not going to help you create an observable, measurable goal for reducing a behavior. So teachers, I'm going to show you some different ways like to collect the data. It's actually easier for you in the end lots less writing, and it's actually a lot faster to collect data versus anecdotal notes. So different ways to collect data, as we kind of talked about. ABC forms, frequency. So ABC forms, you observe and record on a sheet, like I showed you where it was, here was the date. So this is another version of an ABC form. Antecedent behavior consequence. Sometimes they're blank and you write this information in. Teachers I work with, this is the one I actually pass out the most frequently. They like this one because they just have to put a date and time and check boxes. What was the activity? What was going on before? What did the kid do? What did I do? How did the student react? Were there other factors that we know of? The kid was sick today. They stayed up all night playing video games. They told us. And then the severity. Click, click, click. This is one incident. They'll have 3 or 4 of these on one sheet, and you just check your boxes, and that's your data. Frequency recording. This is great for things like shouting out. How often a behavior occurs? It occurred 20 times. Sometimes it's by a time interval. Sometimes it's by a day. Sometimes it might be by a week. But literally, I'm just having you tell me how many times a behavior happened in a certain period of time. Intensity. How bothersome was it? You'll usually create a rubric or a rating scale that is defined, and then you score it. And when we're done, we can actually graph it, and we can see how a child, the intensity of the behavior throughout the course of a period of time. Usually scales go from 0 to 5, but you create a scale that's going to work for you as long as it's clearly defined, so that somebody like me who maybe not was in the room can pick it up and read and understand what each level looks like. You can kind of make it however you want to make it. Duration recording. Duration recording is how long a certain behavior lasts. So we'll use behavior. A lot of times this will be used like, for example, something that's hard to measure using a frequency. You know, tapping a pencil could be 100 times in a minute if they tap it fast. You're not going to count that, but you could say the kid tapped the pencil for 2 minutes. You can use it for how long a kid can stay on task, things like that. And simply start time, end time, or sometimes it'll just have like a line and you'll put a timer. You'll wear like a stopwatch around your neck. And when you see the behavior, you start it. And when the behavior ends, you stop it. And you write how long the behavior lasted. Scatter plot. Scatter plot is kind of a combination of several of these. You'll put what time of day it happens. There'll be a code down here, a key, and you'll put like the behavior, you know, shouting out is behavior A. It happens on Monday at this time, this time, this time, this time, and this time. And then we can find trends based upon this. Partial interval recording. You're looking at whether a behavior does or does not occur at a certain period of time. So I'm going to have 10 intervals of 1 minute each, and I'm going to mark an X or a 0 if the behavior occurs in that interval. Whole interview recording, how often it occurs during an entire interval sample. These are ones that typically teachers aren't doing just because you need somebody outside to come in and observe this while people are teaching. Momentary time sampling, again, does it occur or not occur during a specific period of time? She put up, it said 10:55.
Okay, good.
Yeah, sorry. So that's why I'm trying to go through this quick. Permanent product, that's a test or an assignment. Performance based, or you tore up 10 pieces of paper. Performance based is going to be a test. Duration of the plan. How long is this going to last? Most of them are 1 year, but it can vary according to an individual's progress. The plan should be reviewed frequently, and changes to the plan should be made based on data. So this is the part that you guys probably are really interested in. How do I do this? Give me resources and tools. Books. So these are 2 great books. Actually, a lot of schools have these books in their teacher libraries. This teacher encyclopedia is wonderful because it is actually written by behavior problem, and it gives multiple levels of behavior plans. I do not advocate using canned plans, but this is a great tool, especially if you just don't know much about behavior. It will walk you through tier 1 interventions, tier 2 interventions, and tier 3 interventions. And it's got 100 or so different typical classroom problems and then plans for each. This also is a very similar book to this book. This is an older one. It's the Hawthorne book. It's been around for a really long time, but it's set up in a very similar way to the teacher encyclopedia, where it gives you, it's separated by different target behaviors and gives you interventions and ways to collect data. Both of these books also have some data collection forms as part of them that you can just pull off. This one has like, I think, a CD with it. This one, I think you'd have to copy them, but it also gives you some go-to ready to use tools. Great for an RTI team. These are good websites that are out there for teachers. Intervention Central is wonderful. Lots of different interventions, all evidence-based, all able to give you ways to come up with ideas. I believe it also has some data collection tools, like you can enter some information in and it'll help you generate some graphs and things. This is another great one for behavior strategies. All of these ones are going to be evidence-based. Iris Center is wonderful. It's going to provide case studies. It's going to teach you about different appropriate behavior. It's going to talk more about behavioral function and FBA. This one is going to be tied to the law if you're really interested in it. You're going to hear a lot about IDEA on this website. Good website for that. Behavior blueprints. These are out there. These are different. We use these in my district, but these basically give you some desired behaviors that you can walk you through basically doing a behavior plan. If you're doing data collection and you're somebody who goes in and does observations, maybe you're an interventionist, maybe you are you got a teaching assistant, you're a special education teacher. This app is called On Task. It is a great app. It's for iPads. I would recommend that you have a keyboard on your iPad if you use it though. But this app helps you do systematic observations. It'll flash at you. You click, are they on task or off task? It does your timing for you. You can set up whatever interval you want. You can type in what's happening. It'll give you the minute. It generates this for you. So you know minute by minute what is happening. It gives you consistency percentage telling you, were you good on your observation? Great app. Generates charts for you, graphs for you. You can literally email, when you're done, you email it to yourself. And you can copy and paste things right into IIEP, other behavior plans. You can send it to your school psychologist. Makes your life a lot easier. This is another app very similar to one I just showed you. This one's a little bit more specific. This is probably geared a little bit more towards a behavior person, but still a great app that if you take some time to play with it, anybody can use. Another one, behavior observation. These are actually all apps that I currently have on my school iPad that I do use. This is another good one. Does a lot of different types of data collection. Will graph for you, let you take notes. A good app. This is an awesome app for teachers and RTI teams. You can handle them all. It was created by Catherine Phillips, who I actually talked about earlier. It is, how you use this app is you're going to go through and pick what you think the likely function of the behavior is. And so, you think it's attention, you're going to pick attention, and then it's going to go, I do not like these descriptors, but that's what the app is set up. This is describing a student. So you got the animal, the apple polisher, the arrogant, the attention demander. Which one of these sounds like the kid you're thinking of? Once you click it, it's going to give you a description. The blurter, it's going to give you a description of the behavior, speaks out automatically without permission, acts compulsively, behavior appears over anxious. It's going to give you an idea. The primary function is attention. It's going to tell you methods and procedures. These are your go-to strategies, what you should do to help support this student. The other thing about this app in particular is I love this. Mistakes to avoid. Remember when I said sometimes you can do things that are reinforcing a behavior you don't want to reinforce? This helps you determine what those things are. Don't do this with those kids because you're going to make the behavior worse. If you were to read up here the description of the blurter and you're like, it's close, but it's not exactly what I'm looking at. It also has links to things that other behaviors that are similar. And so you could click these and say, does one of these describe my student better? This is really great for real quick researching, referencing. Hang on, sorry. So this is a good app if you're really unfamiliar with behavior and you need a real quick, what do I do? You're sitting with your special ed teacher, you're sitting down with the teacher and you're trying to give them some ideas, or your RTI teams are trying to get some ideas. This is a really good go-to app. It's written in very easy teacher language, gives you go-to evidence-based resources, and it kind of really does simplify a large part of the beginning process. So I definitely recommend this app as well. So I know that this was a crash course in FBA BIP training. We've got a couple minutes left. If anybody has any specific questions or anything they'd like to ask, I can take questions for a couple of minutes here before we are finished.
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
How do you handle the student who, I'm sure that he's using it to escape, but he always says he has to go to the bathroom and his stomach hurts. And I don't really have a way of knowing, is it really his stomach ache or does he really have to go to the bathroom? And he doesn't have an FBA plan.
Okay. So one of the first things we look at with that is I would sit and talk with the student, just do kind of the student interview portion and find out what's going on. I might verify with the parent that the student does or does not have any sort of stomach problems. A lot of those behaviors, a lot of those types of escape behaviors where that's called somatic symptoms. And so they are telling you they have, and they actually very well may be having physical reaction to anxiety. So you kind of have to look at, are they going in there for a long time? Is it a truly, you're right, it very well may be escape, but why is it escape? If they're having a high level of anxiety, which is causing somatic symptoms, then what you're going to look at is teaching them ways to manage their anxiety. I would be proactive on going to the bathroom. Like I would prompt them to go to the bathroom before different tasks where I need them to sit. And if you know they have gone to the bathroom, then you say, give me 5 minutes and then you can go and try to extend that period of time. Those are different strategies that I would look at on that. But you have to ask a lot of questions of the student on that because there could be a medical, there could also be an anxiety base behind that escape behavior. But you're right, it typically is escape.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Supposedly we have 31 seconds if anybody else has one quick question. If not, feel free to email me and I'll answer any questions that you guys have. Like I said, I know it was a really quick crash course, but I hope it was able to provide you with some information.
Was your email in the chat and I missed it?
It was not. I can put it in the chat real quick
Okay.
if I can get back to the chat here.